Let's go down the rabbit hole of figuring out whether this violence is violently enough or not.
No! God, please, no!
While I was writing my review for Alexandre Aja's video, I actually stumbled upon an article on the Time magazine that put Haute Tension within 10 of the most ridiculously violent films. And I was kind of intrigued, so I had a look at it. It's a list from 2010, and I thought it would be an interesting idea to go through each and every film, nitpicking everything that this critic has to say about the film, and try to actually figure out whether this list is actually worth our attention or not. So first of all, the actual description of this article goes as follows. Time looks at films that revel in over-the-top mayhem. Warning, the following trailers and summaries deal with sometimes disturbing violence. So the first film here that we've got is
Jesus Christ.
Mel Gibson, Passion of the Christ. What he says is basically this. The movie was derided by critics as anti-Semitic and was called the Jesus Chainsaw Massacre by Slate's critic David Edelstein. Roger Ebert, the movie is 126 minutes long, and I would guess that at least 100 of those minutes, maybe more, are concerned specifically and graphically with the details of the torture and death of Jesus. Also writing that it was the most violent film he had ever seen. Okay, the first thing that really makes me mad is that it is actually taking Roger Ebert out of context, because Roger Ebert really liked this film, and also the weird thing is that he's one of those critics that actually didn't find the film anti-Semitic and that was actually defending it. It is a weird thing to write a review where both critics that you're citing are actually directly against each other. This is what he said for the Chicago Sun-Times during his review. First of all, he gave the movie 4 out of 4 stars. What Gibson has provided for me for the first time in my life is a visceral idea of what The Passion consisted of. That his film is superficial in terms of the surrounding message, that we get only a few passing references to the teaching of Jesus, is, I suppose, not the point. This is not a sermon or a homily, but a visualization of the central event in the Christian religion. Take it or leave it. Also, by the way, Roger Ebert is, if you don't know, one of the most prolific and well-known and acclaimed film critic out there, and he's actually the first film critic to win a Pulitzer Prize. Before I give you my opinion, I feel like I still want to give you a bit more context, especially when it comes to all the people who have criticized the film as anti-Semitic. Two Orthodox Jews, Rabbi Daniel Lapin and conservative talk show host and author Michael Medved, also vocally rejected claims that the film is anti-Semitic. They say the film contains many sympathetic portrayals of Jews. Simon of Cyrene, who helps Jesus carry the cross, Mary Magdalene, the Virgin Mary, St. Peter, St. John, Veronica, who wipes Jesus' face and offers him water, and several Jewish priests who protest Jesus' arrest, Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea, during the Caiaphas trial of Jesus. So that seems to me like, even though it was quite controversial at the time, Mel Gibson himself has said that he was trying to remain as faithful to the source material as possible. And actually back then there was a spokesperson from the Vatican who said that the Pope actually liked the film as well. When it comes to the accusations of anti-Semitism, what I found in the film myself is that all the characters in the films are actually portrayed in their most evil but also humane form, whether it is the Romans or the Jews. And I actually really appreciate this portrayal because it was really realistic. And also I find like that it really worked from a philosophical point of view because it really portrayed the human race as metaphorically but also metaphysically aching and desperately seeking a proof of celestial justice. And it's incredible because the more Jesus Christ suffers himself, the more he is used as a punching bag, the more his message and his teachings go through to the audience, and it proves that it doesn't matter how much you hurt others, it will never take all the pain that you have within yourself and that you have for yourself. And I'm saying all of this, of course, not from a religious perspective at all, but from really a film criticism kind of perspective. And I really feel like the violence in this film you could not have made this film without the violence, and you could not have made this film without portraying the realness of what actually happened.
Come. I mean, I knew you would come, but you've come.
I have come.
Gibson said, I wanted it to be shocking, I wanted it to be extreme, so that they see the enormity of the sacrifice, to see that someone could endure that and still come back with love and forgiveness, even through extreme pain and suffering and ridicule. The actual crucifixion was more violent than that was shown on the film, but I thought no one would get anything out of it. I really like Mel Gibson's films, especially because you kind of have the feeling that once he has an idea, he fully commits and he never takes the camera away. I remember watching Apocalypto, for example, and I really enjoyed it because of that aspect. And I really appreciate the fact that Mel Gibson decided to make this film not in English, which is something that most of the times it's done when you think about these kind of historical movies. And I've read also that Mel Gibson actually didn't want to put any English subtitles, and he wanted us to have a raw experience with the material so that we can actually try and understand and decode everything that was going on without understanding every single word of it. And I think it's quite an interesting experimental thing, because that's what I did for the film Apocalypto. I watched Apocalypto without any kind of subtitles, and the movie completely changes because it really allows you to just relate to these people at the most human level possible without trying to understand exactly their motivations and who they are as characters. This is what the writer of the article has to say about it. Sure, director Zack Snyder can justifiably say his movie is based on Frank Miller comic book, not Herodotus or Xenophon, but tell that to the generation of American kids who will now forever associate Persians with hapless, degenerate Sissi men and Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. It is true when it comes to 300, the critics have praised the visuals, but I've completely hated the depictions of the Persians, calling it bigoted and Iranophobic. Personally, I think that 300 is a very cartoonish and stylized way of portraying history and violence and war. There are flying head when Xerxes disciplines his generals, multiple decapitations, multiple stabbings, of course. There is a literal tree of corpses. There are walls of corpses. There is a weird evil werewolf at the beginning of this film during Leonidas' training. And there are literal giants that look like Lord of the Rings creatures. And of course there is a lot of blood, but it is war after all.
They are the hunters of men's souls. They cannot be killed or defeated. Not this darkness. Not these immortals.
Immortals. We'll put their name to the test. We fight as a single, impenetrable unit. That is the source of our strength.
So now that I've packed up all of these things together, when you see all of these things, can you actually imagine that this film is 100% historical accurate when it comes to the representations of everyone on screen? I feel like it's almost objectively impossible to look at 300 and take it at face value.
This is Sparta!
No! This is Patrick!
Whether you are a teenager, whether you are a young adult, whether you are a child, I feel like it is so incredibly stylized and weird and comic book looking that it would be impossible to get that kind of interpretation. This is one of those interpretations that comes along with almost every single film. It's been used since the very beginning of time. It has been used from conservatives, it has been used from progressive people, from religious people, and from any kind of person out there who wanted to censor anything. And it's the argument that we call think of the children.
Think of the children. Won't somebody please think of the children?
No, stop. Think of the children.
Think of the children. Won't somebody please think of the children?
Are there any YouTube videos that I can watch to get my dick smaller? I keep on up to buying a new pair of underwear.
which is basically being like, think of how this movie, this cultural thing will impact the children. But the thing is, when you think about it, everything can impact anyone to do anything. This is something that goes along with other films as well that are part of this list. Can't really blame movies anymore for things that happen. Anything can motivate anyone to be bigoted, to be racist, to be violent against anyone. I feel like it's one of those really easy arguments that you can throw at almost anything that looks weird, that looks controversial, to just shut it down completely. It's literally the cancel culture argument for movies, for art in general. Think about all the different paintings out there. They are in the Louvre as well, and they are depicting acts of violence. They are depicting battles, and there are corpses everywhere. Do you see people going around telling others, won't you think of the children looking at these paintings and being motivated to be hateful human beings? No, nobody says that. So if you want to use that argument, then you have to use it for everything that could inspire anyone to be a bad person. And of course it starts becoming ludicrous. I liked this quote from Zack Snyder, who called the film an opera and not a documentary, and I kind of agree with that. When you look at operas, when you look at Greek myths, when you look at theater especially, there are a lot of things which have been transformed century after century, stories that have been completely told and retold and reinterpreted through different lenses, and they don't look like the originals anymore. But we have to appreciate it in a different way, and we have to look at it through a different lens. Banned at various points in several nations, the movie almost landed Deodato in prison as Italian authorities were so convinced by the violence on screen. Rape, murder, mutilation, skewings, castrations, beheadings, that they assumed the director had actually murdered his actors. It was only once he was able to present them in person that all the charges were actually dropped. Notoriously though, several animals were killed during the filming of Cannibal Holocaust, including a large turtle, a monkey, and a pig. So for the people who don't know this film, it's an exploitation film. It came out in 1980. It's an Italian director called Ruggero Deodato who made it, and due to his notoriety, actually Cannibal Holocaust has been banned in more than 50 countries as of 2006, and Entertaining Weekly named it as the 6th most controversial film of all time. Honestly, I don't think I would recommend this film to most people, but I'm glad it exists because narratively speaking, it's kind of like a perfect testimony of just the disgusting cruelty of mankind, whether it is from a diegetic narrative perspective or from the backstage of the making of this film. Or it also goes to show our common crave for sensationalism, our desire to always dominate other lesser creatures, our desire to always dominate and conquer and destroy other cultures, or even our complete disrespect of or any other living creature that we consider as lesser than us. I don't think that I agree with the people who actually point fingers at the hypocrisy of this film, because there have been different interpretations of Cannibal Holocaust saying the exact same things that I just told you. But people have called it a hypocritical kind of thing because the director has said on multiple occasions that no, he just wanted to make a cannibal film. But I think that it definitely doesn't delete all of these aspects from the film. And funny enough, it kind of reminds me of The Exorcist, where you've got kind of a film, a horror film that almost transcends its own genre and its own idea of what being a horror film means, and it kind of erases the line between fiction and reality. And it also kind of feels like Cannibal Holocaust has gathered such a weird following that it's become a propaganda film, and that it cannot possibly be just watched, but it asks to be deconstructed and it asks to be contextualized so that you can actually understand, if not only appreciate, the film itself. Plus, I kind of think that as a critique of the exploitation genre, it really works, narratively speaking, because the journalist who is the main character in this film, he is actually saying that all of the stuff that they did was completely disgusting and they should not promote this kind of found footage, weird, exploitative types of journalism, right? And this is not the kind of stuff that usually happen with horror exploitation film of the 70s or the 80s. Most of the times you would just go in, watch people getting tortured, watch blood go everywhere and eyes being plucked out. The credits would roll and you'd leave the theater feeling completely disgusted. That's what watching an exploitation film would be like. So I feel like this is definitely not a standard exploitation film when it comes to its representation of violence. I actually found it really interesting when I found this quote from Sergio Leone himself, who really praised the film. And I would say this with an Italian accent because it's way more funny. Dear Ruggero, what a movie! The second part is a masterpiece of cinematographic realism, but everything seems so real that I think you will get in trouble with all the world. And of course, when it comes to all the animals that died during the production, Deodato himself, he condemned his actions, and of course he would. It makes a lot of sense. And he said, I was stupid to introduce animals. Although 6 animal deaths appear on screen, 7 animals were killed for the production, as the scene depicting the monkey's death was shot twice, resulting in the death of 2 monkeys. And of course, that part of the film is completely disgusting, but I still feel like it doesn't belong in the category of ridiculously violent. And I will explain that with the next few films, but I find that already by contextualizing it and giving you different interpretation, we're slowly getting to a kind of understanding of what it actually means, what everything means. Kill Bill is making no effort to be subtle. The blood squirts by the gallons and bodies are dismembered by dozens. The violence is so caricaturish and campy, it's the kind that the whole family can enjoy. Or not. This is one of the only films in this list that has not sparked any type of weird controversy when it comes to the making of the film. Besides maybe the fact that Uma Thurman didn't really enjoy working with Tarantino. And I feel like it's because Tarantino has built his entire career on his treatment of violence. And that's why people were just not shocked when Kill Bill came out. And I feel like Kill Bill, the violence itself is so perfectly contextualized because Kill Bill is a postmodern film. It's a postmodern film that is criticizing and commenting on a lot of different subgenres which use a lot of violence to drive the narrative. If you think about the blaxploitation genre, if you think about the western genre, if you think about the martial arts genre, if you think about the spaghetti western genre, all of those genres, without the action, without the violence and the death, there is nothing happening. And the violence is an important aspect that cannot be taken out of these films. And of course, I can see what he means when it comes to this film, when he says that it is ridiculously violent. But what I like about my idea for this video is that there are different interpretations of what it means to be ridiculously violent. And I feel like there is a negative and a positive one. And I feel like this list itself is kind of like in between a lot of different things, and we never understand whether he's actually recommending the film or simply saying that this film should not exist. I don't understand why it was made. And that's exactly with that kind of weird blurry line that I'm trying to play with when it comes to my critique of the list. There are moments in Kill Bill which are ridiculous, but they are incredibly well staged, and for me it kind of represents the kind of lyrical depth, the beauty of lyrical depth that you get, for example, in the anime sequence, where you get these moments of like beautiful music, everything slows down to a minimum to appreciate just a squirt of blood that goes on the wall and keeps going and going and going and going, and it almost feels cartoonish and it almost feels stupid, but you really feel the death a lot more when it is so incredibly exaggerated. It really puts you in the shoes of the main character who is actually committing that violence on the other ones. And I feel like this film, instead of going away from the violence, just the fact that you drag it, it draws attention to it. When you think about it in everyday life, whether you've seen any war reports or any kind of documentaries that are depicting violence, violence is incredibly fast. Things happen all of a sudden and there is no way that you could predict them sometimes, and the repercussions are always a lot more scary than the violence itself, meaning that violence in real life is all of a sudden and goes away as quickly. There is no dramatization, and I feel like in Tarantino's films violence almost becomes a tool for the characters to express themselves.
Bitch, you don't have a future.
Peckinpah inserts orgies of shocking violence in the film The Wild Bunch. By the time of the film's famous final showdown, in which the men indiscriminately mow down waves of Mexican soldiers, it's clear that the outlaw code the men claim to follow is just as meaningless as the brutality they inflict. So The Wild Bunch is a revisionist western, so it's one of those new neo-western types that kind of tries to go against the grain and tries to do something different from traditional westerns, and I can really see that. First of all, it's incredibly long. I fucking hate westerns, and I had to watch this film and just stay there for 2 hours without moving, and it was really hard. I hate westerns because they're always the same, but even this revisionist western here, it is mostly the same besides the first and the last act, which are these incredible set pieces with huge depictions of violence. But the thing is, when it comes to the western genre, as I said before, the violence drives the narrative. Even if you know nothing about western, you know that the structure of a western is always there is someone coming to town who is trouble, the sheriff is gonna try to stop him, he makes more trouble, someone makes more trouble, more police comes, and they actually kill the criminal. The end. Very often it's something like that.
With y'all, I'm fine. I call this one fish out of water.
But what I liked about The Wild Bunch is actually that during these two set pieces, during this act of violence, there are just a shit ton of people getting killed, and everyone is getting killed. It's not just the criminals, it's not just the sheriffs, and it's not just the people who represent the law. It's women, children, normal people that are just walking by, soldiers, people who are just like having lunch and not giving a shit about what everyone else was doing, and they just get killed by chance, you know? Really don't agree with how this film is presented in this critique here. I feel like this is, as I said before, it's the exception to the rule, meaning that these two acts of violence, even though they are relentless, they are the most realistic that we've seen within the genre, and they really make you reconsider the reasons they lead you to liking these kind of films and liking these kind of characters. I don't think it's that kind of film that makes you lose yourself within the narrative so much that you don't care at all for what is happening. Also, exactly because of that reason, I feel like that the writer of this article could have chosen any other western made in that span of 30 years, and you could have chosen any one of them that was, for example, depicting the genocide of the Native Americans, or any film that was depicting the Native American population as incredibly evil or nasty or deserving of punishment. Those ones would have been a lot more racist, a lot more disgusting, and a lot more ridiculously violent, and not deserving our time as viewers. Is this purely reprehensible trash, or as its director claims, a feminist critique of male sexual violence? No, it's not. I will stop the quote here. It's clearly not a feminist film, and I will explain why that later. No matter the interpretation, A Spit on Your Grave is still nearly impossible to watch 30 years later. I will agree with that final part, but not because of the violence. Not necessarily because of the violence, unless maybe I've watched way too many horror films and I'm starting to be desensitized, but I don't think so. So A Spit on Your Grave was classed as a video nasty back when it came out in the United Kingdom, and just to let you know, a video nasty was basically one of those banned films that if anyone caught you owning it on any kind of VHS, for example, you could get fined, and for certain films you could actually get some prison time. There are a lot of other nations back then that actually banned the film, like Ireland, Norway, Iceland, West Germany, claiming that it glorified violence against women, and Canada also initially banned the film, and then of course it changed a couple of years later. Let's be honest, A Spit on Your Grave is 100% a cruel, bad-made horror film. The way that this film is written and the way this film is structured, it destroys this woman's body by sexual abuse and mind, by the fact that these people keep humiliating her by letting her think that she can get away, or also by the fact that they make fun of her writing, for example, and other things like that. But I feel like the most disgusting thing about this film is not the violence itself as much as the way that it's structured, because it gives more screen time to the perpetrators, to these hateful people, instead of the victim herself, which is a completely disgusting thing to do. Even after the act, we don't spend a lot of time with her trying to recover, but we immediately go to the perpetrators who are having discussions and getting afraid because they might be caught, and they want to make sure, you know, that she's actually dead and stuff like that. And it's completely disgusting, because this is the moment where we should actually be be with our main character and stay with her perspective, which was actually the one that we started with the very beginning of the film. This was a creative choice made by the filmmakers and the people behind this film, so that basically we start empathizing a little bit with the perpetrators, almost like we empathize with the victim herself. And that's exactly why people say that it glorifies violence against women, because from the way that it's filmed, from the way that it's edited, it's actually signaling to us that we should care about what happens to these people, while it's actually not the case. That is actually something that in the remake was not present at all. The perpetrators, they completely disappeared from the screen, if I'm not mistaken, once the act was finished, and we were spending time with the victim, dealing with all the pain that she suffered from, and her planning her revenge and torture of these people. Found a review of I Spit on Your Grave, which I wanted to read you because it really summed up exactly how I felt. This was painfully, obviously written by a man. I can tell because the rape scene lasted 25 fucking minutes and they tortured her physically and mentally the entire time. But her revenge was PG. I was expecting all 4 rapists' dicks to be sewed off and blended into a smoothie while she moisturized with their blood. Incredibly disappointing. There is no catharsis, there is no emotional release from the actual revenge. But I think this is why the film doesn't really belong to this list, mostly because it's not because of the violence itself, but it's because it's simply put a bad horror movie that doesn't deserve the cult status that it has. That alone should be enough to give you an idea that there is some messed up stuff going on in this movie, but we'll continue. Josh gets tortured with a drill before violently having his throat cut. Oli loses his head and Paxton makes it out of prison a couple of fingers lighter than when he came in. Like we said, it's messed up. Okay, Hostel is a fucked up movie and it kind of deserves to be on this list, I will admit it. And it's also kind of weird because the whole story behind Hostel is that Tarantino really liked Cabin Fever, so Elijah Roth's previous film, and he really pushed Elijah Roth to write an original horror movie, and he came up with Hostel. And it's really funny, while I was researching this film, I found out that the first original pitch of the film was actually a lot more interesting. And basically the original pitch was him creating almost like a fake documentary, mixing real and fake facts, and incorporate real people as well as fake people, and allegedly using vacation murder spots for the film itself. And when I read you the pitch, this would have been a lot more interesting than what we got instead, because Hostel is 100% just watching people getting tortured. There is no interpretation that actually makes the film worthwhile. The violence itself is ridiculously violent, and actually the film was actually accompanied by a lot of criticism from the Czech Republic and Slovakia for representing their countries as completely backwards, full of people who are only into prostitution and crime and rape and murders and stuff like that. And the incredibly funny thing is that Elijah Roth responded to that criticism by saying this: "Americans do not even know that this country exists. My film is not geographical work, but aims to show Americans ignorance of the world around them." So are you calling yourself an ignorant? So you're literally making a film as ignorant as the people who are going to watch it later on, right? Because there is no actual criticism in this film. There is no contextualization of the thing that you just said, right? The fuck. So yeah, I mean, Elijah Roth is an idiot, there is no denying that. This is the only film that I actually agree that it should be on this list. But once again, if you want to put this film on the list, why not any of Rob Zombie's exploitation films? They are incredibly weird and they kind of fit with the definition of ridiculously violent, because there is not a lot of depth to his films.
I have to break free from this culture of mechanical reproductions and the thick incrustations dying on the surface.
It's basically Lord of the Flies if you replace the book's underlying political and philosophical overtones with senseless mayhem. Subtitles: government issued exploding neck collars and 9th graders who get stabbed in the forehead. So Battle Royale is an incredibly well-made film. It manages to do so many incredible things. There are flashbacks, there are dream sequences, there are... so many different characters, there are so many creative deaths at the same time. And actually when I was researching the film, I found out that the director of the film, he made this film for a very specific reason, and that's because the book of which this film is adapted from really called back to him to something that happened to him when he was a child, and it reminded him of his time as a 15-year-old munitions factory worker during World War II. And at that time his class was made to work in a munitions factory, and in July 1945 the factory came under artillery fire and the children could not escape. They dived under each other for cover. The surviving members of the class had to dispose of the corpses. At that point, Fukasaku realized that the Japanese government was lying about World War II, and he developed a burning hatred of adults in general that he maintained for a long time afterwards. When you hear a story like this, it is almost impossible not to understand how much of a personal and important film Battle Royale must have been. It's one of those films, once again, the violence is actually being used to make a critique of the government and also of a desensitization of a youth culture. And the only controversy when it comes to Battle Royale is that it was actually released in the United States right after the Columbine school shooting, and that's why it was incredibly badly received and it was really criticized, because it just came out at the wrong time.
I'm singing in the rain, just sing.
Graphic rape scenes were censored in the US. A British teenager found guilty of manslaughter in 1972 allegedly drew inspiration from the movie's violence. Other copycat incidents would lead to Kubrick withdrawing its distribution in the United Kingdom. This was the critique for A Clockwork Orange. Once again, of course, you cannot put the blame only on movies when it comes to those kind of things. They happen, unfortunately. And when it comes to the movie's violence of A Clockwork Orange, it's the same argument that I used for Battle Royale, meaning that this film is literally about violence. It's about adults and it's about teenagers not being able to deal with each other, and teenagers using violence, using ultra violence to kind of try to retain some kind of control within their lives, even though it's a thought that is completely misled and it's completely disgusting, of course. I feel like it's definitely an interesting political critique of the United Kingdom back then. I think it definitely links to the punk movement as well, and to this feeling of the youth being completely uncontrollable. And plus it's a dystopian psychological film, so what did you expect as well? Of course that those kind of films are really gonna dig deep and make really strong claims in order to shock us, in order to make us rethink the way that we live our lives and that we perceive the government or the government's actions. Almost 50 years have passed since the release of A Clockwork Orange, and the violence in it is not that shocking, especially if you compare it to other films that have been mentioned in the list. If you compare it to Hostel, for example, this is literally Looney Tunes kind of violence in comparison to Hostel, which is literally just torturing people for no reason whatsoever. I feel like when it comes to violence, you really have to ask yourself this question: does the violence actually serve the narrative? Does the violence actually draw the plot? Or is the violence completely useless and being put there just to entertain us, just to wake us up, just to create some interesting thing happening in between one conversation and the other one? And when it comes to A Clockwork Orange, it's definitely not the case. Yet for all the violence, it's the film's unforgivable ending that leaves the audience feeling most violated. Je suis complètement d'accord par rapport à ça, surtout parce que le retournement en fait dans le film était complètement inutile. C'est un peu un truc à la M. Night Shyamalan, dans le sens que c'est vraiment, ils essayent de faire des détournements juste parce que ça rend le film un peu plus intéressant, un peu plus fun. Mais finalement, en fait, le film était vraiment parfait dans le sens que il était bien rythmé, il était bien tourné, c'était bien violent comme en fait les slashers des années 80. C'était vraiment le massacre à la tronçonneuse à la française. française. Et en fait, dans le genre lui-même de slasher, la violence était requise en fait pour faire ce type de film. Et en fait, quand je pense à ce film-là, au lieu de me demander si la violence était complètement ridicule, je me demande plutôt pourquoi ce film et pas d'autres films. Pourquoi il n'a pas, par exemple, parlé des Serbian Film, pourquoi il n'a pas parlé de Martyr, pourquoi il n'a pas parlé de Saw, pourquoi il n'a pas parlé de Destination Finale, par exemple. Destination Finale, c'est le film par excellence quand on pense, par exemple, à voir des gens mourir de façon la plus ridicule possible, et on est là pour regarder ça et pour être amusé par ça. Et pour ce qui concerne ce film, je pense le seul truc qui me dirait que je le conseillerais pas, il y a des interprétations qui sont un peu bizarres par rapport au fait, par exemple, qu'il y a un dédoublement de la personnalité du personnage principal, qui est interprété d'une façon qui est très mauvaise, très cliché, pour la façon en fait d'accepter les gens qui ont des problèmes de santé mentale. The idea of making this film came from the word ridiculous, because I really don't like when film criticism they use the word ridiculous, because it actually means that the film is worth ridicule, that the film is worth making fun of, which of course takes something away from the film. For example, when you read the title of this video, when you learned the title of the article, what was your first reaction? Because of course when you hear the 10 ridiculously violent films, you immediately jump to the conclusion that it's meant to be something negative and not something positive, like, oh my god, look how ridiculous this is so much fun, right? And just because I feel like the films within the list didn't belong, and just because I feel like the title itself was kind of misleading, I went through this weird rabbit hole where I deconstructed everything. And I hope that you actually enjoyed that. I was thinking of making another video about my own pick of the 10 most ridiculously violent films of all time. And I have two videos actually, one with a positive spin and one with a negative spin, meaning that those are the films that would be completely unwatchable, deserve to be erased from history, and that really don't deserve to exist in the first place. And then the other one would be a positive one where this is so ridiculous, it's so much fun, right? So if you like those ideas, just let me know in the comments and I will definitely make those videos. Let me know if you've seen any of these films and if you find them ridiculously violent or not. Having said that, I hope you liked this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe because it always helps. I'm Patrick and this is Torn Apart.
We got a winner. I said we got a winner. We got a winner.
Da 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 da.